and William and I have been doing everything we can to process and manage this privately for the sake of our young family. As you can imagine, this has taken time. It has taken me time to recover from major surgery in order to start my treatment. But most importantly, it has taken us time to explain everything to George, Charlotte, and Louis in a way that's appropriate for them and to reassure them that I'm going to be okay.
A single envelope delivered to Kensington Palace contained something Catherine never expected to see. Inside was a DNA test revealing a secret Diana had carried to her grave. As Catherine read the results, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The document confirmed what Palace Whispers had only dared to suggest.
Eating disorders, whether it be anorexia or bulimia, show how an individual can turn the nourishment of the body into a painful attack on themselves.
A hidden truth so explosive it could shatter the monarchy from within. Within moments, her legs gave out beneath her, tears streaming down her face as she realized nothing would ever be the same. Diana's final secret was finally exposed, and the crown would never recover. Catherine, Princess of Wales, hesitated when she first held the envelope. Her initial thought was that it must have been delivered to the wrong address, perhaps meant for another member of the household entirely, but the weight of it felt significant, and an inexplicable sense of unease settled over her as she turned it over in her hands. After a moment's consideration, she broke the seal and removed a single sheet of paper from inside. The document bore a header from a laboratory she had never heard of before. Printed across the top in bold letters were the words, "Confidential DNA report." Her breath caught as she began reading through the contents, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The report contained names that were deeply familiar to her, names connected to the royal family in ways that should not have appeared together in such a context. More troubling still were the clinical conclusions written in stark, matter-of-fact language at the bottom of the page. According to the document, a DNA comparison had been conducted between her late mother-in-law, Diana, Princess of Wales, and another individual whose name appeared on the report. The findings suggested a biological connection that palace historians and official records had never acknowledged. The implications were staggering. If the results were accurate, they contradicted decades of carefully maintained narratives about the royal family's private life. Catherine read through the document multiple times, hoping somehow that she had misunderstood or that subsequent readings would reveal a different interpretation. But the language was clear and unambiguous. The clinical precision of the report left little room for doubt about what it was claiming. Her hands began to shake as the full weight of what she was holding began to sink in. This was not simply a piece of interesting historical information. It was something that could fundamentally alter public understanding of the monarchy itself. She stepped back from where she had been standing, pressing the paper against her chest as her eyes darted around the room. Through the door, she could hear the sounds of her children playing somewhere down the corridor, their voices bright with innocent laughter. They had no idea what their mother had just discovered, no sense of the storm that was beginning to form. For a moment, she considered simply destroying the document, pretending it had never arrived. But she knew that was impossible. The knowledge was already there, lodged firmly in her mind. As she stood in the quiet room, memories began surfacing that she had previously dismissed as unimportant. There had been conversations over family dinners where certain topics were conspicuously avoided. She remembered catching peculiar glances exchanged between other family members when Diana's name came up in certain contexts. At the time, she had attributed these moments to the general sensitivity around discussing someone who had died so tragically. Now, those same moments took on a different character entirely. For months, possibly even years, there had been whispers circulating in certain circles, rumors of hidden connections, of children who might carry royal blood without bearing royal names. Catherine had always considered such talk to be nothing more than tabloid speculation, the kind of sensational gossip that inevitably surrounded any famous family. She had learned early in her marriage to ignore most of what appeared in the press, but the document in her hands suggested that at least some of those whispers might have been rooted in truth. The timing of the envelope's arrival could hardly have been worse. Relations within the family had already been strained over disagreements about royal duties and public responsibilities. There had been tensions between Catherine and King Charles regarding the direction of the monarchy, and the role she should play in shaping its future. She had wondered at times whether some of the resistance she encountered stemmed from concerns about her becoming too influential or too independent in her thinking. Now she found herself questioning whether there had been other motivations at play, whether efforts to control her public image might have been connected to fears about what she might eventually discover. The potential consequences of what the DNA report revealed were almost too vast to fully comprehend. If the information became public, it would not simply embarrass the royal family or generate negative headlines for a few weeks. It had the capacity to challenge fundamental assumptions about lineage and legitimacy that underpinned the entire institution of the monarchy. Questions would be raised about who had known about this and when they had known it. There would be demands for explanations about why such information had been concealed and who had been involved in keeping it secret. Catherine sank into the nearest chair, unable to stand any longer under the weight of what she had learned. Her vision blurred as tears began forming without her fully registering that she was crying. The sound of her own quiet sobs seemed distant, as though they were coming from someone else entirely. She had no clear sense of what to do next, no obvious path forward that did not involve potentially catastrophic consequences. The list of people she felt she could trust with this information was frighteningly short. One thing was absolutely certain in her mind. There would be no way to forget what she had just read. The knowledge was permanent now, impossible to unknow or set aside. Whether she chose to act on it or not, it would color every interaction she had with other members of the family going forward. Every conversation about Diana would carry new meaning. Every discussion about family history would be shadowed by what she now understood had been deliberately omitted from official accounts. The document remained clutched in her hands as she sat in the stillness of the room, trying to process emotions that ranged from shock to anger to a deep, overwhelming sadness. Somewhere in the background, she could still hear her children's voices, a reminder of the life that continued around her even as her own world had just shifted dramatically. She thought about Diana and the burdens she must have carried, the secrets she might have held close even in her final days. For the first time, Catherine felt a connection to her late mother-in-law that went beyond the general sympathy she had always felt. She understood now what it meant to hold information that was both precious and dangerous, to know something that could not be safely shared, but that also could not be comfortably kept silent. The weight of the discovery pushed Catherine toward a decision she had never anticipated making. She needed to understand the full scope of what Diana had known and what she had left behind. The cryptic references that had seemed like nothing more than emotional reflections suddenly demanded closer examination. Diana had written extensively during her lifetime, leaving behind diaries and letters that had been preserved by her family. Some of these writings had been made public over the years, displayed in exhibitions or quoted in biographies. Catherine recalled seeing excerpts from Diana's diaries during a visit to Althorp, the Spencer family estate where Diana had grown up and where much of her personal archive remained. At the time, those diary entries had struck her as poignant, but somewhat melodramatic, the sort of emotional outpouring that anyone might produce during a difficult period in their life. Diana had written about feeling trapped, about sensing that certain truths could never be spoken aloud, about hoping that someone in the future would understand what she had endured. The language had been passionate, and at times almost desperate, but Catherine had interpreted it as the natural response of someone dealing with a failing marriage and intense media scrutiny. Now, with the DNA report fresh in her mind, those same words took on an entirely different significance. Diana had written specifically about a discovery she had made, something she described as fundamentally altering her understanding of her marriage and her place within the royal family. She had been careful not to name specifics, perhaps aware that her diaries might one day become public. But the emotional intensity behind the words suggested this was not simply about her husband's infidelity, which was already well documented. This was something else, something that Diana believed had to remain concealed regardless of the personal cost to herself. There were also references in Diana's correspondence to a particular confidant, someone outside the immediate royal circle with whom she had shared certain concerns. In letters that had surfaced after her death, Diana had alluded to information she possessed that could damage the institution of the monarchy if it were ever revealed. At the time these letters became known, Most observers had assumed she was referring to details about her troubled marriage, or perhaps information about other family members' private lives. The letters had been written in a tone that mixed defiance with genuine fear, suggesting Diana understood she was playing a dangerous game by even acknowledging the existence of such secrets. Catherine made arrangements to travel to Althorp under the guise of needing time away from London. She told her staff and William that she required a few days of quiet reflection, a break from the constant demands of public life. The explanation was accepted without question. Everyone understood that the role of Princess of Wales came with immense pressures, and taking occasional retreats was considered both reasonable and healthy. No one suspected that her true purpose involved investigating matters that the family had worked for decades to keep buried. The estate itself was vast and steeped in history. Walking through its corridors, Catherine felt surrounded by Diana's presence in a way she never had before. Every room seemed to whisper of the woman who had grown up there, who had left to marry a prince, and whose life had ended so tragically. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken stories, with the weight of things that had been carefully preserved, but not necessarily shared, with the wider world. Catherine had arranged a discreet meeting with one of the estate's longtime housekeepers, a woman who had served the Spencer family for most of her adult life. The conversation was carefully worded, with Catherine expressing interest in understanding more about Diana's personal papers and whether there might be materials that had not been made available to previous researchers or biographers. The housekeeper's response was measured but telling. She acknowledged that certain items remained in the family's private collection, materials that Diana herself had specifically designated for limited access. After some discussion, the housekeeper agreed to show Catherine to a section of the estate that few visitors ever saw. They walked down a long corridor to a door that appeared to have been rarely opened in recent years. The brass handle was tarnished, and the hinges protested slightly as the door swung inward. The housekeeper offered Catherine a look that seemed to convey both warning and sympathy before stepping back and allowing her to enter alone. The room beyond was smaller than Catherine had expected, but densely packed with archived materials. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes that appeared to have been organized with great care. Much of the content seemed ordinary at first glance, the accumulated papers and photographs that any prominent family might preserve. But Catherine's attention was drawn to a specific area in the far corner where 3 boxes sat slightly apart from the rest. Each was bound with faded ribbon, and on the side of the boxes, written in Diana's distinctive handwriting, were the words "For Catherine when the time is right." The specificity of that instruction sent a chill through her. Diana had not written for William's wife or used any generic description. She had used Catherine's actual name, suggesting a level of foresight that seemed almost impossible. How could Diana have known decades earlier that someone named Catherine would one day need to see these materials? The only explanation was that Diana had understood her secrets would eventually demand attention from whoever occupied the role of Princess of Wales in the future, and she had prepared accordingly. Catherine carefully untied the ribbon on the first box and lifted its lid. Inside were letters, many of them written in Diana's hand with an urgency that was visible in the occasionally shaky script and crossed-out words. Reading through them felt like eavesdropping on someone's most private thoughts. Diana wrote about meetings she had attended in secret, conversations she had conducted away from palace surveillance, and investigations she had quietly pursued into aspects of her own life that troubled her deeply. Among the letters were photographs, their colors slightly faded with age, but their content perfectly clear. They showed Diana in the company of a man Catherine did not immediately recognize. He was well-dressed and carried himself with a certain presence, but he was clearly not a member of the royal family, or anyone Catherine had encountered in official contexts. What struck her most forcefully was the resemblance he bore to certain family members. The shape of his face, the set of his eyes, even his posture carried echoes of features she knew well. Beneath the photographs and letters was another envelope, this one sealed and marked simply with the word DNA. Catherine's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were documents suggesting that Diana had begun her own investigation into questions of paternity and lineage. The papers were not as comprehensive as the report Catherine had received, but they pointed in the same direction. Diana had known, or at least strongly suspected, that there were biological connections within her sphere that did not match official family narratives. The implications were staggering. Diana had not merely been suspicious or paranoid, as some accounts of her later years had suggested. She had actively pursued evidence and had apparently found enough to convince her that something significant was being concealed. The question was what she had intended to do with that information and why she had chosen to preserve it rather than making it public during her lifetime. Catherine spent hours in that room, going through box after box, reading letter after letter. With each new document, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. The man in the photographs appeared repeatedly throughout Diana's papers, always at the periphery of her story but never quite at its center. There were references to his background, hints about his connection to the family, and suggestions that his very existence represented something the palace could not afford to acknowledge. As Catherine compared details from the photographs to historical records and family trees, she began to understand the scope of what had been hidden. This was not simply a matter of an extramarital relationship or an indiscretion that had been swept under the carpet. The evidence suggested something far more consequential, something that touched on fundamental questions about royal lineage and the rules that governed succession. The man in Diana's photographs appeared to have a claim to royal blood that had been systematically denied and erased from official records. Armed with the evidence she had gathered from Althorp, Catherine knew she could no longer avoid confronting those who had been part of concealing the truth. The decision to approach King Charles directly was not made lightly. Their relationship had always been complex, marked by mutual respect but also by underlying tensions about the direction of the monarchy and the expectations placed on her as Princess of Wales. This conversation, however, would go far beyond their usual disagreements about public duties or media strategy. She found him in one of the private sitting rooms at Clarence House, away from the staff, courtiers who typically surrounded him during official business. He seemed to sense the gravity of what was coming, settling into his chair with an expression that was difficult to read. Catherine did not waste time with pleasantries. She placed the documents on the table between them, the photographs from Diana's archive clearly visible on top of the stack. Charles glanced at the materials briefly, his face remaining carefully neutral. His initial response was dismissive, suggesting that Catherine had been misled by old gossip and the confused writings of someone who had been under tremendous stress. He characterized Diana's later years as a time when she had not always been thinking clearly, when the pressures of her position had caused her to see conspiracies where none existed. The implication was clear. Catherine should not place too much trust in materials left behind by someone whose judgment had been compromised. But Catherine had anticipated this response. She did not raise her voice or become emotional. Instead, she began reading directly from Diana's letters, quoting specific dates, names, and details that could not be easily explained away as the products of an overactive imagination. She laid out the timeline of Diana's private investigation, showing how it had been methodical and careful rather than impulsive or paranoid. She presented the photographs and pointed out the unmistakable resemblances that anyone could see. The careful mask Charles had maintained began to crack. His sighs became heavier, and the pauses between his responses grew longer. Eventually, he stopped trying to deny the basic facts of what Catherine was presenting. Yes, he acknowledged, the man in the photographs had been part of Diana's life. Yes, there were aspects of that relationship that had never been made public. The admission came reluctantly, each word seeming to cost him something. What disturbed Catherine most was not the confirmation itself, but what followed. Charles explained that he had known about the situation for decades. More than that, he had been part of an agreement reached within the family to ensure the information never became public knowledge. The decision had been made at the highest levels to systematically remove any trace of this man from official records. Documents had been altered or destroyed, stories had been suppressed, and anyone who showed signs of asking uncomfortable questions had been quietly discouraged or discredited. Charles defended these actions as necessary for the stability of the institution. He spoke about the monarchy as something larger than any individual, a system that required protection even when that protection demanded difficult choices. In his view, Diana's suffering, while regrettable, had been an acceptable price to pay for maintaining public confidence in the crown. The alternative, he suggested, would have been chaos that could have brought down the entire institution. Catherine listened to this justification with growing fury. She thought about Diana's isolation, her public struggles with mental health, The way she had been portrayed as unstable and attention-seeking, even as she tried desperately to make people understand what she knew. The realization that Charles had possessed the power to validate Diana's claims but had chosen not to use it felt like a profound betrayal. It was not just a betrayal of Diana, but of every principle the monarchy claimed to represent. Her voice rose as she challenged his reasoning. She pointed out that protecting the institution by sacrificing the truth was not protection at all, but a kind of moral rot that would eventually destroy the monarchy from within. She accused him of valuing the appearance of stability over actual justice, of being willing to let Diana suffer and die with her secrets intact rather than face the consequences of acknowledging them. The accusations came faster and sharper, each one stripping away another layer of the careful decorum that usually governed their interactions. Charles remained firm in his position, insisting that she did not fully understand the pressures and responsibilities that came with his position. He suggested that in time she would come to see that difficult compromises were an inevitable part of royal life, that idealism had to give way to pragmatism when the stakes were high enough. But his words only deepened Catherine's sense that something fundamental had broken between them. As she left that meeting, Catherine felt herself changing. Years of trying to be the perfect royal, of following protocols and accepting that there were simply some things about the family she was not supposed to question, suddenly seemed hollow. She recognized her own complicity in the system that had destroyed Diana. By playing her assigned role without pushing too hard against its boundaries, she had become another person who helped maintain the silence that protected lies. The confrontation with Charles left her shaken, but there was still one more conversation that had to happen. William needed to know what she had discovered. The decision to tell him was agonizing because she understood what it would cost him. Unlike her, William had grown up inside the system. The monarchy was not just an institution he served, but part of his identity. Asking him to confront the possibility that his entire family had been built on carefully managed deceptions was asking him to question everything he had ever known about himself. She waited until late in the evening when the children were asleep and the household staff had retired for the night. The documents were spread across the table in their private sitting room when William entered. He could see immediately that something serious was happening, though he could not have guessed the specifics. His initial reaction was to approach it as he would any family matter that needed discussion, with a mixture of concern and the expectation that, whatever the problem was, it could be managed. As his eyes moved across the papers, however, his expression shifted. Catherine watched the exact moment when understanding hit him, when the implications of what he was seeing became clear. The color drained from his face, and his body went rigid. He tried at first to push back against it, insisting that it could not be accurate, that their family had already endured enough scandal and tragedy without this. But even as he spoke, she could see doubt creeping into his voice. William's memories of his mother were deeply personal and often painful. He had been old enough when she died to remember her emotional struggles, her tears, her attempts to make him and Harry understand things that were difficult for children to process. He recalled conversations where Diana had tried to tell him something important but had stopped herself, perhaps deciding he was too young or that the burden was too heavy to place on his shoulders. Those half-finished conversations took on new meaning now. Anger began to surface as he thought about his father's role in all of this. Charles had been there throughout Diana's struggles, had watched her suffer, and according to what Catherine had learned, had known the whole time that she was telling the truth about matters the palace dismissed as fantasies. The betrayal was not just of Diana, but of her children, who had grown up thinking their mother's pain was somehow her own fault, or the result of her inability to cope with royal life. William's thoughts turned to his brother Harry, and that is when the full weight of the situation seemed to crash down on him. If what the DNA evidence suggested was true, then Harry's entire sense of identity, his place in the family, even his struggles with belonging, had all been shaped by a lie that no one had been willing to name. The bond between the brothers had already been strained by Harry's departure from royal duties and his public criticisms of the family. This revelation would add another layer of complexity to an already difficult relationship. The choice before William was impossible. He could bury the information as his father and grandfather had done, continuing the pattern of protecting the institution at all costs. That path offered stability and the preservation of the life he had always known. Or he could choose to expose the truth, knowing it would likely trigger a crisis that could fundamentally alter or even end the monarchy as it currently existed. That path offered integrity, but at a price that included his title, his role, and possibly his relationship with other family members who would see his choice as a betrayal. Catherine reached for his hand, her own voice breaking as she spoke. She reminded him of his mother's courage, of how Diana had tried to leave a trail for them to follow even when she knew the personal cost of doing so. She asked him to consider what it had meant for Diana to live with these secrets, to know she would never be believed, to watch the institution she had married into systematically work to discredit her. The plea was simple but devastating. Do not let her final secret die unacknowledged. Do not let her suffering have been for nothing. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge neither could ignore. William sat with his head in his hands, caught between the boy who had promised to protect his mother and the man who now bore responsibility for an entire institution. Before he could formulate a response, before either of them could decide what to do next, they were interrupted by someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Camilla's arrival was unexpected, but not entirely surprising in retrospect. Information traveled quickly within palace walls, and the tension between Catherine and Charles had not gone unnoticed. Camilla entered Catherine's private sitting room without knocking, her composure perfect, her expression revealing nothing of what she might be thinking. She settled into a chair as though she had been invited, and began to speak with a tone that was almost conversational. She congratulated Catherine on her discovery, the words delivered with just enough edge to make clear that congratulations were not actually what she meant. Camilla acknowledged that she had known about Diana's secret, and admitted that she had understood its implications for years. What made her admission chilling was not the fact that she had known, but how she described using that knowledge. By remaining silent at crucial moments, by never confirming or denying what Diana suspected, she had secured her own position within the family. Knowledge, she suggested, was power when used correctly. Catherine struggled to process what she was hearing. Every word from Camilla carried an implicit threat, a reminder of how precarious Catherine's own position could become if she chose the wrong path forward. Then Camilla made the threat explicit. If Catherine chose to make the DNA evidence public, she would not only damage the monarchy, but would also open herself to retaliation. There were, Camilla suggested delicately, stories about Catherine's own family that could find their way into the press. Questions about her background, her marriage, even her fitness for the role she occupied could suddenly become topics of public discussion. The atmosphere in the room became suffocating. Catherine felt her anger rising but kept her voice measured as she responded. She pointed out that silence had been what destroyed Diana, that continuing to hide the truth would only perpetuate the same patterns that had caused so much damage. But Camilla simply smiled, a cold expression that carried no warmth, and delivered her final warning. Revealing this secret would not just topple the monarchy, it would ensure Catherine's own destruction in the process. The night after Camilla's visit was one of the longest Catherine had ever experienced. Sleep was impossible as her mind churned through everything that had happened, weighing the threats against her conscience, measuring the potential consequences of action versus the cost of continued silence. The palace walls seemed to close in around her, making it difficult to breathe. Every corner of the building felt compromised, every conversation potentially monitored, every ally uncertain. She had reached a point where inaction felt as dangerous as any decision she might make. By dawn, her choice had crystallized. She could not live with herself if she allowed Diana's final secret to remain buried simply because speaking the truth was difficult or dangerous. The threats to her own reputation and position seemed insignificant compared to the larger principle at stake. Diana had tried to reveal this information and had been silenced. Catherine would not allow that silence to continue, regardless of what it cost her personally. The decision to arrange a press gathering was made without consulting the palace, communications office, or seeking approval from senior royals. It was a direct violation of protocol, which required all public statements to be carefully coordinated and approved in advance. Catherine understood that by acting independently, she was essentially declaring that she no longer considered herself bound by the rules that had governed royal behavior for generations. She contacted several trusted journalists directly, arranging for them to gather outside Kensington Palace early the following morning. The invitations were vague about the specific topic, but clear that the Princess of Wales would be making a significant personal statement. Word spread quickly through media circles that something important was about to happen. As dawn broke over London, photographers and reporters assembled outside the palace gates. The atmosphere was thick with speculation. Some wondered if Catherine might be announcing a separation from William. Others thought she might be addressing her health, or stepping back from certain royal duties. No one anticipated what was actually about to unfold. When Catherine finally appeared, the crowd immediately fell silent. She looked composed, but clearly emotional, her face showing signs of sleepless nights and the weight of what she was about to do. In her hands, she carried a folder containing copies of the documents she had discovered. She approached the microphones that had been hastily set up and took a moment to gather herself before beginning to speak. Her statement started not with the revelation itself, but with context about Diana. She spoke about the Princess of Wales as more than a cultural icon or a tragic figure. She described a woman who had been brave enough to confront truths that threatened powerful people, who had tried to leave evidence of what she knew for someone who would one day be strong enough to act on it. Then she addressed the DNA evidence directly. Her hands shook as she held up copies of the report, explaining in clear terms what it revealed. She confirmed that Diana had a child whose existence had been concealed from the public for decades. The statement was careful but unambiguous. This was not speculation or rumor. This was documented fact, supported by scientific evidence that Catherine had personally verified. The reaction from the gathered journalists was immediate and visceral. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several reporters called out questions before remembering themselves and falling silent again. Photographers' cameras clicked frantically, capturing every moment of Catherine's statement, every tear that ran down her face. Within seconds, alerts were going out on phones around the world. News organizations interrupted regular programming to cover what was rapidly being recognized as one of the most significant royal revelations in modern history. As she finished speaking, her legs gave out beneath her. William, who had been standing just out of frame, moved quickly to catch her. Their embrace was captured by dozens of cameras, both of them openly crying, clinging to each other as the full weight of what had just happened settled over them. The public reaction was intense but deeply divided. Social media exploded with commentary ranging from fierce support for Catherine's courage to anger at what many saw as an unforgivable betrayal of the royal family. Many people expressed profound sympathy for Diana, seeing the revelation as vindication of a woman who had been dismissed as unstable during her lifetime. Others saw the disclosure as unnecessarily destructive, arguing that some secrets were better left buried for the sake of stability. Within days of Catherine's statement, speculation began about whether Diana's hidden son would come forward. When he finally did appear, the moment carried enormous weight. He approached a podium, his bearing suggesting someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. The resemblance to certain royal family members was striking enough that many observers felt they understood immediately, even before he spoke. His statement was brief but powerful. He acknowledged Diana as his mother without qualification or apology. He thanked Catherine for having the courage to do what he himself had been unable to do for so many years. He explained that he had always known his true parentage, but had chosen silence out of a desire to protect his mother's memory. The question everyone wanted answered came near the end of his statement. Would he pursue any claim to titles or position within the royal family? His response was carefully worded but suggestive. He noted that while blood had been denied for decades, it could never truly be erased. The implication was clear. He considered himself part of the family, whether or not they were willing to acknowledge him. As weeks passed, it became clear that the monarchy would never return to what it had been before Catherine's revelation. Too many questions had been raised, too many assumptions challenged. Whatever came next would have to be built on a different foundation, one that somehow acknowledged uncomfortable truths while still maintaining enough public confidence to justify the institution's continued existence.